Welcome. This is Len Bertain, one of the founders of the War on Waste Academy. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about the War on Waste that we've developed for the internet. Basically, what is it? We think that we've developed a systematic way to deliver the War on Waste over the internet, and it uses the same principles we've used in the classroom over the last 30 years. And the way we go about it is we bring teams together to solve problems. Now, because we can use the internet to bring those teams together, the participants in the team can be in Paris, France, Dallas, Kuala Lumpur, or Belgium, and they can all work on the same problem together in their remote locations. So this is a beautiful addition to the war on waste. In essence, what we're doing is we're looking at inefficiencies in sales by looking at effects on top line. And then also on the bottom line, we look at the inefficient production processes that get in the way of generating profits. But the key thing is that we focus on process. And to drive that point home, a number of years ago, I went into a client who was making DNA oligos, which are segments of DNA used by researchers. And he asked me, well, you don't know anything about what we're doing. And I said, well, really, I don't need to. I just need to be able to ask your people what their processes are and if they're doing anything in that process that is inefficient and keeping your product from either being delivered on schedule with the right characteristics, features, and so forth in a timely manner. And by gosh, we can find it. And he goes, oh, okay. And we'll talk about that in a second. There was early recognition when we were doing the war on waste from Taiichi Ono himself, who was the developer of the Toyota production system. And when he came in to look at what we were doing, he said, aha, you know what you're doing. And we were doing work in hospitals and banks and other things, and he was really impressed by that because we went into one bank where we were applying the principles, and he really loved that. Now, what he really liked is that we'd been able to create a blend of the war on waste from war on muda, which is the Japanese term for waste, from Taiichi Ono's perspective, which was looking for Zen perfection in the processing of products. But we were focused totally on how those imperfections affected profits. And the balance that we brought between those two is really what he liked. And he gave us kudos for it. Over the last 30 years, we've delivered the war on waste to over 150 companies, and we've generated about 100,000 or 10,000 ideas. Our goal in the war on waste is to find $100,000 of waste that can be fixed for $2,000. And we did a study, an audit of 23 companies that we did the projects with a number of years ago, and we did 371 projects. We implemented those projects with a cost of roughly $735,000. That's a little less than $2,000 a piece. And we generated $28 million in profit. So when you look at the ratio of 28 million to 735,000, you get 38 to 1 or 3,800%. Of course, our goal in the eWoW program is that wasn't any in our regular war and waste program is that we needed your ideas. It all starts with what do we mean by adding value? And adding value is what the customers are willing to pay for. So once you know what that is in a company, you can then start looking at what is waste. Waste is everything that gets in the way of delivering value. So we defined waste in that way. We just said it's anything that keeps you from delivering value to your customers. Early on, when we started to do the war on waste, we had a category that we called necessary waste, because Henry Ford had used that term. And Unfortunately, that didn't go over too well. But when you look at what their function is, you need to pay people, so your payroll clerk is non-value added. The uh, people that are taking orders are non-value added. Um, and so when you had all these people, they were essential support functions. They supported the adding of the value of the business. And so, I mean, I one day I went out to the dock, and he was probably 6'5", and he says to me, comes right up to my face, and he says, "I don't want to be looked upon as waste. I think we do a good job out here on the dock." And I said, "Come on, calm down. I'm not saying you're waste. I'm saying that your job doesn't add value." And we had a to do about that, and we went around and around on that. But he finally came to understand that. But when you're doing the war on waste, it can be pretty frightening when somebody like that comes at you. Some of the key concepts that we've worked with are no blame. That's really allowing change without reprisal. In other words, you don't want to blame people for coming up with an idea, or you want to encourage them. But if you blame them, they're not going to give you any ideas. The whole way we got into this was the very first class I ever taught. It was 6:30 in the morning at a company, and I got around to about 15, 20 minutes into the class. I said, "Okay, do you talk about waste?" And the first guy raises his hand, and before he responds, he turns around, looks in the back of the room, and then realizes that there's no manager there, so he volunteered two really good ideas. But the key here is that you've got to protect people with no blame, and we did that. The scientific paradigm plays itself throughout the whole process in that we use a lot of analogies to business. We use the quantum leap. Uh, we use the second law of thermodynamics to help get some clarity on why you need to use a tool like the war on waste to add energy to a company, because it helps restore order to the business and so forth. So we use a lot of analogies throughout the training. And then finally, we have the 567 rule. That was our rule that we found because if you apply the 20-80 rule, like 20% of the effort gets you 80% of the possible benefit, we found, gosh, we didn't have time to collect 20% of anything. We said, just do 5% and see where you end up. And lo and behold, we kept seeing about 60 to 80, 60 to 70% of the time we asked them to get 5%, they were getting roughly 67%. And so that became our de facto rule that we call the 567 rule. 5% of the effort gets you 67% of the benefit. So the war on waste process is 6 steps. Is first of all, identify a waste, determine its root cause, find out the size of the waste. This is actually where they spend most of their time trying to figure out how big it is, because sometimes it's not obvious where the real waste is when you've identified one. Then the cost is with the idea of $100,000 of the size of the waste and not spending over $2,000. Then the 5th step is presenting the solution in your implementation plan, to the CEO and or the champion. And finally, there's the implementation and monitoring process. We collect data for 1 year after you've completed the program or completed the presentation. And at the end of the year, we try to determine whether or not you've achieved or captured the benefit that you were talking about. Here are some examples on this slide and this slide of wastes that you might want to look at. I like this one in that it looks at advertising wastes and marketing wastes and lost sales. And particularly advertising waste, you never think about that as a waste, but if your marketing efforts are targeting the wrong audience, or you've got your focus on the wrong 20% to get 80% of the benefit and so forth, these are very important areas to look at in your business. and we'll give you actually access to this slide presentation when we're done. Just ask Brent or any of the people that we've presented it to give you that. We've noticed that 1 out of 6 of the ideas of those 10,000 ideas was what we call a big idea, or instead of 50 to 1, it was 100 to 1. One of them was the oligo company I'd mentioned earlier, and the employee came to me after the second class and said, I have an idea that I think we can make progress on in the class. And I said, what do you need? And he said, I need to buy a gantry robot that happens to be in San Francisco at a trade show, and if we can get it, spend the $3,500 right now, we can get it in our facility tomorrow. So I went to not the CEO, but to the president. And the reason I didn't go to the CEO is he said, look, if you go to the CEO, he's going to kill this project. He'll get in, mess it up, it'll have his stamp all over it, and it just won't get done. And he and I will probably fight about it. But if we do it my way, I can get all the people on my team together, and they can help me get a project through. And they did, and they had a pilot ready on Monday of the 5th week to show the CEO, and he was blown away by it. And he said, how come you didn't tell me about that? You told me about all the other ones. And I said, well, he said, probably I would have gotten in the way, huh? And I go, yeah, I think so. Asked and answered. The next one was a factory in a field where an employee said, instead of building the bricks and mortar to house the vegetable cleaning, produce cleaning material, put it on a tractor or trailer, and move it from field to field as needed to when vegetables are being picked, because they all don't come due at the same time, and you'd be able to move it around more efficiently. And it turned out that was a great idea. There's a story about a law firm doing business. If I send you this video and you click on turning away business, there's a video that plays that describes the situation. There was a managing director of the law firm got in the way, and that he didn't want to spend any money, and it was costing him about $1 million a year in profits. The machine shop dealing with hot jobs. Now, a hot job in this particular story is really funny because everybody, all the other teams in the class, 4 or 5 teams, were all going along smoothly, and this team was not doing well. And so what I did was I went back and I said, okay, what's the problem? And they said, well, you can't agree on anything, and they're just sitting there twiddling their thumbs. And I said, well, okay, put it this way. Does anything piss you off when you come to work every day? And the guy said, oh, yeah. And he jumped up. He was all excited. He says, hot jobs piss me off. And I said, well, what's a hot job? He says, well, they come in with a hot job. I have to tear down my machine. I do the hot job, and then I come back 2 weeks later, and it's still sitting out in the shop floor. It hasn't advanced to the next process. And he goes, that really makes me mad. And not only that, it means I had to set up the damn job I took off. I have to set it up a second time. And that just makes me mad. Right about that time, the CEO came in. He says, hey, everybody, how's it going? And I said, you got to come over here. And I told him about what they were complaining about. So we solved that about two months ago. And the guy stood up, and he was about 6'3", but he was obviously still pissed. And he slams his hand down on the table. He says, damn it, we didn't solve that job. And well, anyway, I gave him a ruled tab of paper and sent them out to find jobs. They came back in about 15 minutes later, and they had about a page and a half of hot jobs, and the CEO got the message. Well, then he was immediately in bed with these guys to help them get that problem solved. Well, of course, we solved it with about $1,800 worth of effort to reclaim probably $900,000 of lost productivity. One was this was a hospital had a process to improve surgery. Um, they wanted to add a surgical wing, and instead of doing that, we looked at the way they were doing surgery and found out the process was extremely inefficient. The doctors didn't want to spend any money on uh, people to help clean up between surgeries, and we had one guy struggling to try to keep up. And by putting a team of 5 people available, and one guy at $20 an hour with benefits, and put 5 people in there, they could turn around the job. Instead of 2 to 3 hours to turn around a facility or a surgical room, it took them 10 to 15 minutes because they went in and just blitzed it. So anyway, that saved $6 million that the surgeon in charge, head surgeon, wanted to spend to get a new surgery wing funded. And incidentally, he did support what we were trying to do. He didn't fight it. He fought it initially, but he came on board and was a good supporter. The the Filipino market waste was when each person from the Philippines went into this bank to get a check to send it back to their mom and dad in the Philippines. It was costing them 40 minutes to an hour to get the check. And the solution was open up an ATM in the Philippines earlier than they wanted so that they could just give mom and dad a Filipino in Philippines an ATM card. They could put the money in San Francisco and they could get it in the Philippines that evening. That was a pretty good solution because it not only solved the problem, got rid of that waste, but it gave them access to 500,000 new clients, Filipino clients that came to the bank to take advantage of that. And finally, we had a data recovery problem at a retailer that we ended up with a 96-to-1 return on the lost availability of the systems when they went down, costing them $24 million. And for $250,000, they solved the problem. And on top of that, the solution that was offered by a very high-end consulting organization was about a $10 to $15 million solution. So it had a low return on investment. Just a few comments about what is strategy. We like to think of when we do the war on waste, we're intimately tied to strategy, and it's this way. What strategy is the value proposition to the market, and waste is really how the delivery of the value is affected by your processes. In other words, how efficient you are at delivering that value. And so in essence, the strategy and waste interact or intersect, and in essence, the amount of waste is really a measure of the efficacy of your strategy and the various strategies you're using to deliver that value. So we find that strategy actually aligns with process. There's more movement of strategy to process than the other way around. Thank you very much for listening, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Thank you.